Mexican search team Topos joined the rescue efforts in Haiti after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. The Taliban co-founder and political chief Abdul Ghani Baradar has arrived in the capital Kabul to form a new government. And Cuba already has 3 vaccines anti-COVID-19. The emergency use of vaccines Soberana O2 and Soberana Plus has been approved. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. Rescue efforts continue in Haiti after the 7.2 magnitude earthquake that resulted in over 2,000 deaths so far. According to authorities, more than 12,000 people were injured, while hundreds of individuals remain missing. Severe rains brought by Storm Grace frustrated rescue efforts and caused flooding across the country. Institutions like the World Food Program, the International Organization for Migration, and UNICEF sent humanitarian aid to the Caribbean nation, which includes food, blankets, medicine, water, and sanitation material. A group of Mexican search and rescue workers known as Topos continue to look for bodies and possible survivors that might still be trapped under the rubble, following the magnitude 7.2 earthquake that shook Haiti last week. In the small port city of Le Cayes, the Topos International Group used an electronic device to search for possible life in the wreckage. The group of Mexican rescuers focused on Friday night on a quake-damaged 2-story home where equipment that allows them to detect sounds beneath the rubble caused some noise. The Mexican rescue team, together with Haitian Red Cross, worked all night, but no survivors or bodies had yet been found.
We have an instrument to detect life, and 5 times it has given us a reading that has made us suspect, though we cannot confirm it, that there might be a person inside that is breathing but not moving. We will be working to the limit of our ability, but the life detection instrument could have given us a false positive reading.
Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed, along with United Nations Development Program Administrator Akim Steiner, traveled to Haiti to sympathize and show their solidarity with the Haitian people and government.
Once again, the incredible resilience of the Haitian people who have suffered so much and are now mobilized to support their neighbors and communities in the aftermath of the earthquake. This is a moment that we believe that Haitian people come together. We saw an enormous amount of unity in the response to the earthquake, and so we believe that this can be turned into an opportunity for building back better.
In the meantime, Puerto Rico's National Guard citizen soldiers and helicopters were deployed to Haiti. The National Guard's aviation unit was also present in the Caribbean nation to assist in the rescue and medical transport of injured individuals and aerial assessments of the area. Prime Minister of Haiti, Ariel Henry, said that despite the general situation in his country, he will organize transparent elections.
I have pledged to do my utmost to put my country back on the rails of a functional democracy with the organization of good, free and transparent elections as soon as possible.
In Bolivia, the state's general attorney, Juan Lanchipa, presented to the Supreme Court of Justice the accusatory requirement against Janine Añez for the massacres of Sacaba and Sencata committed during the coup of 2019. The requirement will have to be addressed to the Plurinational Legislative Assembly, which will authorize an account of responsibilities trial for the 20 dead and injured in Sacaba and Sencata. Lanchipa explained that Añez is provisionally accused with the crimes of genocide, severe and mild injuries, and injury followed by death. The legal claim was presented amid an accusatory proposition by the victims of the violent acts played out in Bolivia in November 2019.
The Public Ministry presented today in the Supreme Court of Justice the accusatory requirement against the citizen Janine Añez Chavez for the acts and events provisionally deemed as genocide, severe and mild injuries, and injuries followed by death.
In the Catatumbo region in northern Colombia, on the border with Venezuela, it is very common to see people dying or suffering terrible wounds due to landmines. Twice in 10 years, Efrain Soto's life was shattered in landmine explosions in Violence Rack, Colombia. The first one robbed him of his eye, the second one killed his brother. Since the explosion, Soto has had a nervous breakdown and seizures, with over 2,200 dead and more than 8,000 wounded between 1999 and 2017, according to the watchdog Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor. Colombia is one of the countries worst affected by landmines after Syria and Afghanistan.
I was left with a broken leg, splinters in my body. I was wearing sweatpants that practically came off. My boots were all broken. I practically only still had my underwear. My shirt was also shredded to pieces. And then a splinter got in my eye, my right eye, so I lost my eye completely. You don't want to be in an area like this, but there is nowhere to go. Or wherever you go, there is no work. You have to go out to work. What else can you do? And we didn't think that my brother would step on a landmine.
The psychological impact is not very visible. It is something that is not seen. It is easier to recognize when I go back and say there are wounds, but the psychosocial issue or the mental health impact is quite high in places where this phenomenon has been occurring.
Criticism of the electoral process continues in Honduras. The government made the decision to transfer the funds management to the executive branch, depriving the National Electoral Council of its independence. Political and social organizations consider this as a dangerous action for the November electoral process.
The Liberty and Refoundation Party, Libre, denounced a new attempt at fraud in the November 28th elections, since the National Electoral Council will not be in charge of contracting the companies that will print ballots and carry out the voting data transmission.
How can we believe that the corrupt, the dictator, the person who has led our country into crisis, who has committed fraud in the last two electoral processes, is now the one who managed the funds to carry out this electoral process?
For members of the opposition, the idea of reducing the autonomy of the National Electoral Council is a move to conduct fraud, based on a transmission of data that has been questioned in the previous processes.
Little by little, plans have materialized to stop the electoral process or to make of the electoral process a process full of acts of corruption, as it has always been done, not only in economic terms, but also in terms of the result obtained after the process.
Given the fragility of previous democratic processes, this situation is considered a sign of the growing political instability in Honduras, which worsened in the 2017 elections when the Electoral Tribunal took a month to announce the official results.
These politicians are not thinking about the nation, nor the Honduran people. They want to continue destroying the country, destroying the hope of the Honduran population. But I believe that it is time for the Honduran population to act. Especially we, the women, have to act.
The opposition has called on the population to be alert to the calls for protest prior to the elections and to be able to correct the lack of transparency in this new process scheduled for November 28th.
I believe that as citizens we should speak out, we on the alert, to make these demands now that we are in time for a solution on electoral day. After the elections, what we are going to do is crying our spilled milk.
The Honduran electoral calendar is several weeks behind schedule, and the problems in budget management could serve as the justification to delay the elections scheduled for November.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Cuban Center for State Control of Medicines, Equipment, and Medical Devices authorized emergency use of the COVID-19 vaccines Soberana O2 and Soberana Plus. This approval is supported by the results obtained after the phases 1, 2, and 3 of the clinical trials, as well as an intervention study in several groups and population at risk. According to the authorities, these studies provided sufficient elements on the safety and efficiency of the vaccines for their massive use in the country and their subsequent marketing abroad. It was also suggested that the vaccination program should combine 2 doses of Soberana O2 and a 3rd dose using Soberana Plus. Meanwhile, the director of epidemiology, Dr. Francisco Duran, reported that 27% of the national population has already received the 3 doses of one of the vaccines developed in Cuba.
At the moment, 27.5% of the Cuban population has 3 doses of the candidate vaccines, and 38.8% has a 2nd dose, and 43.6% of the entire Cuban population has received at least a 1st dose.
In other news, Hurricane Grace leaves at least 8 people dead in Mexico. It has caused heavy rain and strong winds on Saturday, causing flooding, power blackouts, and damage to homes. Tecolutla residents survived the damage after Hurricane Grace lashed through the city. The storm made landfall in Mexico for a 2nd time during the night near Veracruz state as a major Category 3 storm, triggering warnings of mudslides and significant floods. The streets of Tecolutla, home of about 24,000 people, were littered with fallen trees, signs, and roof panels as dawn broke. Grace was weakening rapidly over land, but still causing very heavy rains and flooding over portions of east central Mexico.
You could just hear the thunder of the falling sticks. It sounded very nasty, very horrible. I was very scared. I was very scared last night.
The roof, everything is gone. Grace took everything with it.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg was back protesting outside the Swedish parliament on Friday to mark the 3-year anniversary of her first school strike, which grew into a global protest movement. Thunberg's initiative caught on around the world, with millions joining the weekly Fridays for Future protests to call on world leaders to listen to scientists about climate change and act to stop it. Fridays for Future became a global movement not only advocates for stop pollution, but also to use politics and resources for a better cause than consumerism.
Unfortunately, I think we will still be protesting in 3 years because this will take many decades, unfortunately, probably, or at least many years. We don't know, but we will still have to do everything that we can. In order for us to start caring about this is to make us aware of what's actually happening. That's my, I'm convinced at least. When we understand the severity of what's happening and when we understand what we can do about it, I'm certain that we will start to take action, because we are not, if we start to treat the crisis like a crisis, if people around us start treating the crisis like a crisis, I think that we will start to take action.
For the 6th consecutive weekend, several hundred people gathered in Paris to protest against President Emmanuel Macron's COVID health pass. These weekend's marches are organized by several different groups, like the Yellow Vests, and by hard-right politicians like Florent Philippot. The health pass makes vaccination essential to carry on with routine activities. According to official figures, last weekend, nearly 215,000 people took part in the anti-health pass marches all over the country, down from the 237,000 who had joined protests the previous week. Australian police clashed with hundreds of anti-lockdown protesters in Melbourne and Sydney on Saturday, as officials reported the country's highest ever single-day rise in COVID-19 cases. Police used tear gas in Melbourne to break up crowds surging towards police lines, while smaller groups of protesters were prevented from congregating by Sydney by a large contingent of riot police. The protest comes as Sydney tightened its lockdown amid a growing outbreak of the COVID-19 in the city. Sydney, of more than 5 million people, has been in a strict lockdown for more than 2 months now, failing so far to contain an outbreak that has spread across internal borders and as far as neighboring New Zealand. Members of the ethnic group Kemat fled to Sudan due to the increase of armed conflict in the country. According to UN reports, around 200,000 people have been displaced from their homes in Amhara, of which more than 60,000 are sheltered in Sudan. The international organization also estimates that the conflict has left more than 400,000 people in conditions of extreme poverty. The fighting in Tigray, northern Ethiopia, erupted in November when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops to dispose the Tigray People's Liberation Front in response to their alleged attacks on military camps.
The regional government attacked us through the Fano, the Amhara Special Forces and the Amhara militias. They were using heavy weaponry to bombard and burn homes.
The numbers are large. We are now in a school and the space is not enough for the current number of people. However, we have taken action. We have distributed plastic covers to prevent rain, and we have provided tree houses and blankets to protect them.
Kenya's court has rejected a controversial proposal to amend the national constitution. Kenya's Senate representatives and lawyers reacted to the court appeal, rejecting constitutional reform in a fresh blow to President Uhuru Kenyatta, who had made new proposals and comments. Meanwhile, a 7-judge panel upheld an early high court ruling that the way the reforms were introduced was illegal, a decision that will change the political landscape with less than a year before the country holds elections.
You know, some of these issues that President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta has contravened Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and specifically Article 73(1)(a)(1) by initiating and promoting a constitutional change process contrary to the provisions of the Constitution on amendment of the Constitution.
We knew then that this process was fundamentally illegal, and what this court has done is to vindicate that position. The lessons are, number one, we need to respect the people, and number two, we need to focus more on issues of economy and supporting the poor person instead of altering our constitution.
And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so stay tuned. Back. The Taliban co-founder and political chief Abdul Ghani Baradar has arrived in the capital Kabul. His presence comes as the group plans to unveil its new government. It's been reported that the Taliban are bringing experts from the country's former administration to help manage this transition. The Taliban are holding talks on ways to make their new government more acceptable to people in Afghanistan and for the international community, but they insist there were not time for elections. The expected reopening of banks didn't happen. Only ATMs were working with a maximum withdrawal limit of $200. Afghan queue outside banks to withdraw cash from ATMs in Kabul, with government buildings, banks, schools and universities remaining closed nearly 1 week after the Taliban seized power. Government employees in Kabul were blocked by Taliban militants from returning to their offices on Saturday, the first day of the Afghan working week. Thousands of people have waited outside Kabul's airport to try to flee Afghanistan as Taliban reportedly began a campaign of persecution against opponents. Around 18,000 people have been evacuated since last week. According to a United Nations intelligence document, the Taliban are going house to house to take retaliation against opponents and their families. Meanwhile, European media affirmed that members of the Islamic Emirate make blacklists with all the Afghans that collaborated with Western countries. On the other hand, according to Reuters, U.S. officials claim that the Taliban have taken possession of 2,000 armed vehicles, as well as 30 and 40 aircraft, and an uncountable number of weapons.
The Taliban is Afghan, and the previous government is Afghan too. We want only one government from the beginning because we had a lot of problems with two governments, and every day there were explosions here and there. Now, thankfully, there is one system. No one asks where we are going. We reach Kandahar from Kabul at night. No one questioned us.
The difference was that people like me were stopped and questioned. We were worried. But now, after the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan came, no one can ask where we are coming from. People now are busy in their business and are happy.
Italy has evacuated hundreds of people from Afghanistan in the past 2 days, thanks to the airlift between Kabul and Rome. Among those transferred to Rome were Afghan nationals who used to work for the embassy, Afghans who have relatives in Italy, and also those evaluated as in need of assistance or protection.
There are many families on board the aircraft, many women and many children. In their eyes, we have glimpsed the despair of leaving their homes in their own country. But without a doubt, they understand the opportunity provided by Italy to find a better future and a new beginning through this flight. In the eyes of the children, we certainly saw the greatest difficulties. They seemed the most lost. In our own small way, we try to alleviate their suffering by donating small sweets, candies and toys. And we recognize their happiness at receiving these small gestures.
And a plane carrying 26 Indonesian evacuees from Afghanistan have landed in Jakarta. 5 Filipinos who were evacuated were also in the flight, according to Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi.
All 26 Indonesian were evacuated. All are in a good condition. One note, one diplomat is unwell, but not due to COVID-19. In addition to Indonesian citizens, this evacuation mission also carried 5 Philippine nationals whose government had requested assistance.
Hundreds have gathered in central London to protest the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban and to show solidarity with Afghan people. The Taliban senior leadership is gathering in the Afghan capital to begin mapping out an inclusive government as desperation deepened for tens of thousands is still scrambling to leave the country. The UK will double its humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan this year, bringing it to 286 million British pounds, Foreign Minister Dominic Raab announced on Wednesday. We continue in Afghanistan, where our collaborator Bag Younes brings us new information about the situation in the country.
The Taliban movement started to give instructions to its members to improve the treatment of the Afghan citizen. And as explained by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar Akhund himself, the second highest ranking figure of the Taliban, he has ordered the members of the movement not to interfere with the citizens who wish to raise the Afghan flag, not to deliberately lower the raised flags, and not to raise the flag of the Islamic Emirate instead. New reports also indicate that Taliban leaders tell their troops that everyone on the ground must submit the reports explaining the degree of commitment and adherence of the militancy to the leadership's instructions, and that otherwise they will be publicly punished, demonstrating that the Taliban do not accept any transgression or violation against Afghan citizens. However, citizens still feel that what is happening in their country is charting an ambiguous future on several levels, especially in terms of education, health, and economy, which is the basis for the establishment of any state. Perhaps the most complicated dossier at present is the news concerning the presence of U.S. citizens and foreigners in general detained by the Taliban, an issue questioned by senior U.S. officials, as it is still unclear to what extent the U.S. administration knows the actual number of U.S. citizens and other foreigners detained in Afghanistan, and whether or not it is possible to return them all safely to their home countries. On the other hand, Pakistan Army Commander General Qamar Javed Bajwa said that his country believes that the Taliban will abide and fulfill the promises they made to the international community on women's rights and human rights in general, and that the Taliban will not allow Afghan territory to be used against any other neighboring country. This came during a lengthy speech at the military college in the Kabul region of Pakistan. General Bajwa concluded that Pakistan has always desired security and stability both in Afghanistan and the entire region, which was evident through its tireless political efforts in this regard, locally and internationally.
The president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, affirmed that his government will be a priority to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and creating stable conditions for the country's economic process. In a speech in parliament, the president stressed that his government's immediate priority is to control the COVID-19 pandemic by speeding up the vaccination process. He said as his second priority, working to improve the national economy and solve people's livelihoods problems, as well as eradicating corruption. On Wednesday, August 25th, the Congress is scheduled to give its vote of confidence to the proposed cabinet, in which several of those elected were ministers during the administration of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and members of the Corps of the Guardians of the Revolution.
Speeding up public vaccination, enforcing hygienic protocols, and boosting the level of medical treatment is a top priority the government is pursuing.
And we come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.